There's something strangely magnetic about the edges of our reality. Places where the rules we take for granted, physics, time, even the boundaries of our world become loose, pliable, and dangerous. For centuries, these thresholds have whispered to us through folklore, myth, and more recently through chilling truths buried deep beneath the archives. Today we'll explore one of these stories, a case that stretches across centuries, crossing the shadowy realms of the Fae and the fragile spaces that separate their world from ours. It begins, as it often does, in a dark corner of London that spirals into something far older and far deadlier than most can imagine. So if you think you know the Fae as gracious, mischievous beings, you might want to think again. Hi, Joe here, welcome back to the Bethnal Archives. First off, thank you for tuning in and for all the support. Your likes, comments, shares keep this project alive and help us bring the stories to you. The Bethnal Archives is still young and your feedback has been invaluable. Looking at the analytics from what I've seen, you guys have really taken a shine to Felix's stories. And I mean, honestly, who wouldn't? The man's a walking treasure trove of history and mystery. That said, let us know if there's anything else you'd like to see. We've got Edward with his global cases, Imogen with her forensic insights, and Virgil's boots on the ground investigation. Each of them bring a unique perspective to the team, even if their solo projects haven't quite hit the same notes. And for those of you who keep saying this is AI generated, I promise you it's not. We're all human, and sometimes to protect the identities of those working on sensitive cases, we do modulate the voices, especially for Edward and Imogen. But rest assured, what you're hearing is our real case notes from here in the archives. Now, let's get on to today's story, because Felix has something particularly chilling for us today, and I'm as eager as you are to hear it. Felix, over to you. Hello everyone, Felix here. Today is the 4th of December 2024, and today I find myself in the quiet before the chaos of Christmas. The archives are unusually still, as if the cases themselves are waiting for something to stir them into life. This time of the year has always felt charged to me, as though the air itself is steeped in an old forgotten magic. Perhaps it's the long nights, or the collective anticipation of the season. Either way, it's no wonder that so many ghost stories find their roots in December. But we're not here to talk about Christmas just yet. Today's story takes us far from the festive cheer and into something darker. It's a case that first crossed Edward Warrington's desk 7 years ago. A cold file at the time, but one that recently resurfaced with a chilling sense of urgency. It involves the thin spaces. Remember those fragile tears in reality that link our world to others from a previous video? And it also involves a particular species of Fae entity that has caused alarm across Europe for centuries. The entity in question are known locally as Raskovniks. This is a fearsome creature, native to the shadowy folklore of Eastern Europe. These creatures have been creeping westward, their presence marked by disappearances and a grotesque reproductive cycle that will leave even the hardiest listener uneasy. Let's start where this all came to light, the Crystalhurst Caves, right here in London. The Crystalhurst Caves are not the sort of place that makes it into tourist brochures. Hidden beneath Southwark, they are a winding labyrinthine network of tunnels and caverns, some of which haven't been properly mapped in decades. They're cold, damp, and filled with almost a palpable silence, a space that seems to swallow sound and light alike. Most of the deeper sections are off limits to the public, but that didn't stop an adventurous YouTuber from trying to make his mark. I won't be naming him here as the case is ongoing. Late one night, while live streaming his exploration in the caves, he stumbled upon something horrifying. Squeezing through a narrow passageway, he found a small, hidden chamber that held 3 bodies. They were piled together in a grotesque heap, their skin pallid and shrunken, their veins collapsed as though something had drained them completely dry. The YouTuber's livestream cut out shortly after his discovery, but not before thousands of viewers saw the initial footage. The incident, as you can imagine, caused an uproar. Retrieving the bodies was no small task. The cavern they were found in was so narrow and unstable, it took hours for the specialist teams to extract them safely. Once they were brought to the surface, the authorities found themselves at a loss, for the injuries on the bodies didn't quite match any known predatory animal, and the level of blood loss defied explanation. That's, of course, when the archives were brought in, and the bodies were passed to Dr. Imogen Grant for examination. When the bodies arrived at the archives, they were in an advanced state of desiccation. Dr. Imogen Grant, our forensic specialist, was the first to examine them, and her findings added a layer of horror that even the initial discovery hadn't conveyed. This is what she reported.
The 3 individuals were discovered in an unusual and unsettling condition. Their skin was dry and fragile, and their veins appeared empty, as though something had removed all fluid from their bodies. This strange state was unlike anything encountered in prior investigations. On closer examination, unusual marks were found on the neck and torso of each individual. These marks were irregular and jagged, suggesting they were caused by something sharp yet uneven. The evidence indicated that whatever caused the marks may have been designed to extract fluids with an unusual level of precision and efficiency. Further investigation revealed another unexpected discovery. Upon opening the abdominal area, translucent sacs were found. These organic structures appeared to be in the early stages of development, showing faint signs of activity, although dormant. The sacs appeared to sustain themselves by drawing nourishment from their surroundings, utilizing tissue from the hosts. This process seemed to be gradual, potentially lasting for years, and indicated a highly specialized and adaptive mechanism. Additionally, traces of a silvery residue were found on the skin and near the marks. Initial tests suggested this substance had properties that were not fully understood and might be linked to phenomena beyond typical explanations.
Dr. Grant's findings confirmed the involvement of something far beyond the natural world. The level of predation and methodical nature of their reproductive process pointed directly to the Raskovniks, a species of fae long known for their predatory tendencies. But they are unlike the fae most people imagine. They share none of the elegance or ethereal beauty associated with creatures from folklore. Instead, they are squat, thick-bodied beings, their limbs disproportionately long and their movements unnervingly sluggish. Their teeth, these hollow needle-like fangs, are their most distinctive feature, a perfect adaptation for their unique feeding habits. These creatures are native to Eastern Europe, particularly the misty forests and the craggy mountains of Transylvania, Hungary and Belarus. But unlike vampires, which folklore often conflates with them, the Raskovniks are not undead. They are fae entities, deeply tied to the thin spaces where their world intersects with ours. They are kind of opportunistic predators. They thrive in cold, damp environments, and they prey on isolated, vulnerable individuals like hikers, spelunkers, and the homeless. Their reproductive cycle is what sets them apart as truly horrifying. For every 5 to 7 years, they enter a frenzied state, seeking to reproduce by embedding their embryotic sacs within the bodies of their prey, and these sacs slowly grow, consuming the host from the inside out until a new one emerges fully formed. The process is efficient as it is gruesome, ensuring their population grows without drawing undue attention. While the Raskovniks are primarily confined to Eastern Europe, their spread westward has been documented over the centuries. Their presence in London marks a disturbing escalation, one that raises questions about why these creatures are moving beyond their usual habitats. The discovery of the Raskovniks in the Crystalhurst Caves are not just an anomaly. This is a warning. These creatures are intrinsically tied to thin spaces, those fragile overlaps where the boundaries between dimensions weaken. Thin spaces are not always permanent. Some fade over time, while others grow stronger due to environmental shifts, dimensional instability, or in rare cases, deliberate interference. The Crystalhurst Caves have been long rumoured to harbour one such space. The historical records from the 18th century mention unexplained disappearances and even accounts of travellers experiencing strange phenomena. A persistent hum in the air, shadows moving independently of any light source, and the disorientating feeling of stepping into a place that shouldn't exist. But, until now, the activity in the caves has been considered dormant, a relic of an older time, but the suggestion of the Raskovnik suggests otherwise. Thin spaces act as gateways, allowing entities like these to cross from their realm into ours. These crossings are rarely accidental, for they are opportunists, drawn to areas where the veil between worlds is weak. What makes their arrival in London so troubling is the possibility that the thin space between Crystalhurst Cave is growing more active. If this is true, it isn't just a localized incident. This is the start of something far larger. Edward Warrington's notes on thin spaces are particularly relevant here. His records, compiled over decades of global cases, describe thin spaces as dynamic, almost living phenomena. They react to external stimuli, environmental shifts, mystical disturbances, and even human activity. The resurgence of thin spaces activity in the Crystalhurst Caves could be linked to a number of different factors, from increased urban development disrupting natural energy flows to unknown disturbances within the Fey realms themselves. But dealing with entities like the Raskovniks requires more than just an academic understanding of thin veil spaces. It demands action, and this is where the Ashen Veil comes in. For those unfamiliar, the Ashen Veil is an interfaith coalition formed in the aftermath of supernatural crises too vast for any one group to handle alone. They specialize in containment and protection, weaving together rituals and practice from multiple traditions to form powerful defenses against threats that defy conventional understanding. When the archives identified the Raskovniks as culprits behind the Crystalhurst incidents, the Ashen Veil was brought in to assess and, if necessary, neutralize the threat. Their approach is always measured. They don't seek to destroy entities outright unless there's no other option. Instead, they focused on restoring balance, ensuring that the human actions don't provoke retaliation from the Fey courts. The Veil's involvement also highlights a critical point: the need for diplomacy. For the Fae are sentient beings, they have their own rules, hierarchies and systems of justice. Interfering in their affairs without consideration can have catastrophic consequences. The Ashen Veil works to bridge the gap between human laws and Fae traditions, ensuring that actions taken against the entities like the Raskovniks are lawful, ethical, and most importantly, effective. In this case, the Veil performed a series of binding rituals designed to seal the thin space in the Crystalhurst Caves. Their methods are intricate, combining sacred geometry, linguistic patterns from multiple faiths, and physical symbols of protection. The goal was twofold: to prevent further incursions by the Raskovniks, and to stabilize the thin space, preventing it from expanding. But intervening in cases involving the Fae isn't just about ritual confinement, it's also about the law. Human-Fae relations have been governed by ancient legislation since the 14th century, when the Accord of Spheres was established. This agreement, brokered between human monarchs and the Fae representatives, laid out the terms of coexistence, trade, and, when necessary, conflict resolution. The Accord was last updated in late 1999, just before the turn of the millennium, with fears of dimensional instability rising. New clauses were added to address cases of grievous alarm, situations where Fae actions posed a direct and undeniable threat to human life. The updated legislation granted human agents the right to act decisively if such cases, provided that their actions were targeted, non-genocidal, and aimed at restoring balance rather than escalating conflict. In this case, their predatory behavior and reproductive cycle clearly constitute grievous alarm. While the Fae courts have been silent for centuries, the actions of the Ashen Veil and the Archives fall within the parameters set by the Accord. Still, it's a delicate balance. The last thing anyone wants is to inadvertently draw the attention of the High Courts, whose intervention could destabilize the fragile peace between our worlds. The immediate threat posed by the Raskovniks in the Crystalhurst Caves was contained, but containment is not the only resolution, for after the Ashen Veil completed their binding rituals to stabilize the thin space, the focus shifted to ensuring that they could not regroup or spread further. This required careful planning, collaboration, and a measured approach. Dr. Imogen Grant's findings were pivotal in shaping the final steps. The embryotic sacs retrieved from the victims were analysed in greater detail, confirming that the development could be halted with precise intervention. The sacs were placed in stasis using a combination of cryogenic storage and Fae binding wards provided by the Ashen Veil. This ensured that they could neither grow nor harm anyone else. However, the presence of the sacs also confirmed a grim reality. This wasn't an isolated incident. At least one mature Raskovnik remained active in the area, and it was likely the source of these reproductive efforts. These creatures are stealth predators by nature, but their habits leave a trail if you know what to look for. Using Edward Warrington's notes of their historical patterns, the Archives coordinated with the specialist branch of the Met Police to trace recent disappearances in London. Their search focused on areas with high concentrations of valuable populations, abandoned buildings, disused subway tunnels, and isolated patches of urban wilderness. It wasn't long before they found a cluster of reports in a derelict industrial site on the outskirts of Southwark. The site, a crumbling textile mill from the Victorian era, was damp, dark, and entirely forgotten. Ideal conditions for their nests. The specialist branch moved quickly. Armed with their Vatican-sanctified silver weapons, salt rounds, and blessed wards, they entered the mill. But what they found confirmed their worst fears, for deep in the lower levels, hidden beneath rusted machinery and piles of debris, they discovered the remains of several more victims, all showing the same signs of exsanguination. The air was thick with a metallic tang. The faint tracks in the dusk suggested movement. Something had been there recently, but now it was gone. The escape of the remaining creatures raised troubling questions. If it had fled the site, where was it now? And more importantly, was it alone? The reproductive cycle of these creatures mean they rarely operate solo for long. A single mature Raskovnik can spawn an entire coven within a decade, providing it has enough prey. This meant that the creature was likely searching for a new lair and new victims. Edward's analysis of the previous cases provided a chilling hypothesis. For every 5 to 7 years, small covens have been reported spreading westward, often emerging near urban centres before retreating in the shadows. Their slow but deliberate movement suggests a larger pattern, possibly driven by changes in the spaces across Europe, and the Crystalhurst Caves incident may be just one nod to a growing web of activity. The Archives, the Ashen Veil, and the Specialist Branch remain on high alert. The thin space beneath the Crystalhurst Caves has now been sealed, and regular monitoring is now in place to detect any signs of renewed activity. However, the presence of the Raskovniks in London highlight a broader issue, the increasing instability of thin spaces worldwide. This case serves as a reminder that our world is not as solid as we might like to believe. The boundaries between here and elsewhere are fragile, and where they falter, things like these creatures slip through. It's tempting to view them as monsters, but it's not that simplistic. They're creatures of necessity, following instincts rooted in a realm we can barely comprehend. But that doesn't make them any less dangerous. But it does remind us that these encounters are not just battles, they're negotiations. This case lingers in my mind not just because of its brutality, but what it represents. There's one incident that immediately comes to mind. The Hollow Men of Skalsmukut. This was a group of Fae creatures that encountered near the Austrian Alps in the late 19th century. Like the Raskovniks, they used thin spaces to migrate the targeted remote populations, but instead of draining blood, they consumed their essence of the victims, leaving behind lifeless hulks devoid of any spiritual energy. But what makes the comparison chilling is that both species displayed a calculated expansion pattern, moving methodically into areas that they could remain undetected for years. It raises a question I can't ignore. Are these migrations connected? Are we seeing the work of a larger force at play within the Fair Realms? When it comes to cataloguing these cases, its unique nature demands a flexible approach. Typically, cases involving predatory Fae fall into the Class 6 malevolent entities due to their clear intent to harm. However, the reproductive aspect of the Raskovniks and their link to thin spaces introduces a broader dimension. Their behaviour touches on the elements of a Class 5 temporal rupture phenomena, as their entry into our world hinges on unstable dimensional boundaries. So after much deliberation, I've decided to classify this as a hybrid class, Class 6 and Class 5 hybrid entry. This classification will help us cross-reference the cases with similar entities while acknowledging the unique challenges posed by the thin space interactions. It's also worth noting that this is not a closed case. Most entries in the archive represent resolved incidents, carefully contained and catalogued for posterity. This, however, is ongoing. The Raskovniks remain at large, and their increase in thin space activity suggests more incursions could occur at any time. As such, I'll be assigning this file to the active watch list, ensuring regular updates and continued collaboration with the Ashen Vale and the Specialist Branch. I have spoken to Rue Fennick, our head of security. Rue has extensive experience in designing protective protocols for our staff, and I trust his expertise to help prepare for this new threat. There's some of the key things he has suggested for people such as Virgil when he's on his cases: silver-edged weapons, salt barriers and portable wards, and one of their biggest challenges is the Raskovnik stealth. Rue is currently working with Imogen to develop a portable sensor capable of detecting the faint energy signatures associated with thin space and Fae entities. And that's everything. I think I've covered everything. That's all I've got time for today. Thank you so much for all the support and all the love, and I hope you found this interesting. So personally, I would say be careful not to go to any Crystalhurst Caves, especially this weekend. Why? Well, because it's close to Christmas and you don't want to die or get swallowed up before Christmas, do we? But in general terms, just be careful and watchful as always. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Hello, Joe back again here at the end of today's podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. And just actually letting you know, we're doing something different. This is episode 27. So since we started this wonderful podcast and I started interning here at the archives, we have done a huge amount of dialogue and recordings with the staff member over the last 27 episodes, and I'm glad some of you guys are enjoying the stuff. As mentioned, some of you guys also aren't enjoying some of the other episodes, and so going forward we're going to be changing. This is the end of series 1, and for series 2 it's going to be slightly different. We're going to be having less content, so maybe only 2 videos a week, but each video shall be longer. So these will be minimum 20-minute episodes up to maybe 40-minute episodes. But as I said, they will be only 2 a week, starting from next week. So there'll be no more content now until possibly Sunday. And that'll be the start of season 2. And I'd love for you to join along and let me know. You know, if there's stuff that you want to see or stuff that you are enjoying or stuff that you're not enjoying, let me know. Yeah, it's cool. We're having fun. And I'll see you next time.